Oh, well, hey there, folks. I thought I was going to be silent tonight, but we are going to unlock our Torah ship tonight. Commander, I believe I can extract more of the holographic message from artifacts. Upgrade operations give me the enhancements I require. Okay, that's next. But let's unlock the Torahs real quick. Oh, we just unlocked it. Oh, we have to build it. We have to build it. Okay. Oh, what? Need 12,500. Okay. Well, that's a bummer. Wasn't expecting that. So I'm just gonna move the camera thing just a little bit. See what I have in reserve. 1,000. That's it? Shoot. Oh, let me collect a few things. That's weird. 10-minute free charge gives me that later, which I don't need. 4-hour free test. Just battleship parts? Shoot. Okay. Well, I thought I was gonna get the thing, but I guess not. Hmm. 12. How in the world? Okay. Build ships. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I can go up there, but I need 12,500 titanium. How in the world? Why do I need that many? That's what I want to know. Why? Yes, titanium. Eight thousand. 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh, that's perfect. Okay. Okay, well, while we're waiting for that, we can go to see. Okay, so we got parachute warehouse at 12. Shipyard level 13. Where's astronautics studio. 11. So we need 2 more levels for astronautics, and we need some parachute here. There we go. So that should work. Perfect. Start research. See what we can research. Can I speak? Fender Taurus. Okay. Okay, next ship is the Tala. The Tala is battleship, I think. Yeah, battleship. Okay. So we can do this one. And his speed ups available. Yes, but I don't want to use them. Okay. Excuse me. I did not do shoot. I never did a reading. I should have. Never did a reading of the Federalist paper yesterday for Federalist Friday. Shoot. Uh-oh. Timeout error. Okay. 6 hours, 1 hour, or 2 hours. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I am going to end the game. But I will read our Federalist paper tonight. So stop sharing. Okay. Let's do a Federalist reading. We're in the 30s now. Oh gosh. We're in the 30s. Oh, and I'll also read chapter 2 of A New Hope. Okay, this is 31. Federalist paper number 31 by Mr. Hamilton. Okay, so here it is. Indistinct distinctions. Yeah. Distinguish. Indistinct and disquisitions. Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to read that word correctly. Indistinct, yeah. Disquisitions. Oh, that's a hard word for me. Of every kind, there are certain primary truths or first principles upon which all subsequent reasonings must depend. These contain an internal evidence which, antecedent to all reflection or combination, commands the assent of the mind. Where it produces not this effect, it must proceed either from some disorder in the organs of perception, or from the influence of some strong interest or passion or prejudice. Of this nature are the maxims in geometry that the whole is greater than its parts, that things equal to the same are equal to one another, that two straight lines cannot enclose a space, and that all right angles are equal to each other. Of the same nature are these other maxims in ethics and politics, that there cannot be an effect without a cause, that the means ought to be proportioned to the end, that every power ought to be commensurate with its object, that there ought to be no limitations of a power destined to effect a purpose which is itself incapable of limitation. And there are other truths in the two latter sciences which, if they cannot pretend to rank in the class of axioms, are yet such direct inferences from them, and so obvious in themselves and so agreeable to the natural and unsophisticated dictates of common sense, that they challenge the assent of a sound and unbiased mind with a degree of force and conviction almost equally irresistible. The objects of geometrical inquiry are so entirely abstracted from those pursuits which stir up and put in motion the unruly passions of the human heart, that mankind without difficulty adopt not only the more simple theorems of the science, but even those abstruse paradoxes, which, however they may appear susceptible of demonstration, are at variance with the natural conceptions which the mind, without the aid of philosophy, would be led to entertain upon the subject. The infinite invisibility of matter, or in other words, the infinite divisibility of a finite thing, extending even to the minutest atom, is a point agreed upon geometricians, though not less incomprehensible to common sense than any of those mysteries in religion, against which the batteries of infidelity have been so industriously leveled. But in the sciences of morals and politics, men are found far less tractable. To a certain degree, it is right and useful that this should be the case. Caution and investigation are a necessary armor against error and imposition. But this untractableness may be carried too far and may degenerate into obstinacy, perverseness, or disingenuity. Though it cannot be pretended that the principles of moral and political knowledge have, in general, the same degree of certainty with those of the mathematics, yet they have much better claims. Yes, they have much better claims in this respect than to judge from the conduct of men in particular situations we should be disposed to allow them. The obscurity is much oftener, that's not a word. That should not be in a word. It's more often in the passions and prejudices of the reasoner than in the subject series. Men, upon too many occasions, do not give their own understandings fair play, but yielding to some untoward bias, they entangle themselves in words and confound themselves in subtleties. How could it happen if we admit the objectors to be sincere in their opposition, that positions so clear as those which manifest the necessity of a general power of taxation in the government of the Union should have to encounter any adversaries among men of discernment? Though these positions have been elsewhere fully stated, they will perhaps not be improperly recapitulated in this place as introductory to an examination of what may have been offered by way of objection to them. They are in substance as follows. A government ought to contain in itself every power requisite to the full accomplishment of the objects committed to its care, and to the complete execution of the trusts for which it is responsible, free from every other control but a regard to the public good and to the sense of the people. As the duties of superintending the national defense and of securing the public peace against foreign or domestic violence involve a provision for casualties and dangers to which no possible limits can be assigned, the power of making that provision ought to know no other bounds than the exigencies of the nation and the resources of the community. As revenue is an essential engine by which the means of entering the national exigencies must be procured, the power of procuring that article in its full extent must necessarily be comprehended in that of providing for those exigencies. As theory and practice conspire to prove that the power of procuring revenue is unavailing when exercised over the states in their collective capacities, the federal government must of necessity be invested with an unqualified power of taxation in the ordinary modes. Did not experience evince the contrary, it would be natural. Did not experience evince the contrary, it would be natural to conclude that the propriety of a general power of taxation in the national government might safely be permitted to rest on the evidence of those propositions, unassisted by any additional arguments or illustrations. But we find, in fact, that the antagonists of the proposed constitution are so far from acquiescing in their justness or truth, seem to make their principal and most zealous effort against this part of the plan. It may therefore be satisfactory to analyze the arguments that which they combated. Those of them which have been most labored with that view seem in substance to amount to this. It is not true, because the exigencies of the Union may not be susceptible of limitation, that its power of laying taxes ought to be unconfined. Revenue is as requisite to the purposes of the local administrations as to those of the Union, and the former are at least of equal importance with the latter to the happiness of the people. It is therefore as necessary to the state governments that should be able to command the means of supplying their wants, as that the national government should possess like faculty in respect to the wants of the Union, but an indefinite power of taxation in the latter might, and probably would in time, deprive the former of the means of providing for their own necessities, and would subject them entirely to the mercy of the national legislature. As the laws of the Union are to become the supreme law of the land, as it is to have power to pass all laws that may be necessary for carrying into execution the authorities with which it is proposed to vest it, the national government might at any time abolish taxes imposed for state objects upon the pretense of an interference with its own. It might allege the necessity of doing this in order to give efficacy to the national revenues, and thus all the resources of the taxation might by degrees become the subjects of federal monopoly, to the entire exclusion and destruction of the state governments. This mode of reasoning appears sometimes to turn upon the supposition of usurpation in the national government. At other times, it seems to be designed only as a deduction from the constitutional operation of its intended powers. It is only in the latter light that it can be admitted to have any pretensions to fairness. The moment we launch into conjectures about the usurpations of the federal government, we get into the unfathomable abyss and fairly put ourselves out of the reach of all reasoning. Imagination may range at pleasure till it gets bewildered amidst the labyrinths of an enchanted castle, and knows not on which side to turn to extricate itself from the perplexities into which it has so ravishingly adventured. Whatever may be the limits or modifications of the powers of the Union, it is easy to imagine an endless train of possible dangers, and by indulging in excess of jealousy and timidity, we may bring ourselves to a state of absolute skepticism or an irresolution. I repeat here what I have observed in substance in another place, that all observances founded upon upon the danger of usurpation ought to be referred to the composition and structure of the government, not to the nature or extent of its powers. The state governments, by their own original constitutions, are invested with complete sovereignty. In what does our security consist against usurpation from that quarter? Doubtless in the manner of their formation, and in a due dependence on those who are to administer them upon the people, if the proposed construction of the federal government be found, upon an impartial examination of it, to be found to be such as to afford afford to a proper extent the same species of security, all apprehensions on the score of usurpation ought to be discarded. It should not be forgotten that a disposition in the state governments to encroach upon the rights of the Union is quite as probable as a disposition of the Union to encroach upon the rights of the state governments. What side would be likely to prevail in such a conflict must depend on the means which contending parties could employ towards ensuring success. As in republics, strength is always on the side of the people, and as there are weighty reasons to induce a belief that the state governments will commonly possess most influence over them, the natural conclusion is that such contests will be most apt to end to the disadvantage of the Union, and that there is greater probability of encroachments by the members upon the federal head than by the federal head upon the members. But it is evident that all conjectures of this kind must be extremely vague and fallible, and that it is by far the safest course to lay them altogether aside and to confine our attention wholly to the nature and extent of the powers as they are delineated in the Constitution. Everything beyond this must be left to the prudence and firmness of the people, who, as they will hold the scales in their own hands, it is to be hoped will always take care to preserve the constitutional equilibrium between the general and the state governments. Upon this ground, which is evidently the true one, it will not be difficult to obviate the objections which have been made to an indefinite power of taxation in the United States. I'm going to read 32. 32 sounds looks pretty small, or short, I should say. Although I am of opinion that there will be no real danger of the consequences which seem to be apprehended to the state governments from a power in the Union to control them in the levies of money, because I am persuaded that the sense of the people, the extreme hazard of provoking the resentments of the state governments, and a conviction of the utility and necessity of local administrations for local purposes would be a complete barrier against the oppressive use of such a power. Yet I am willing here to allow, in its full extent, the justness of the reasoning which requires that the individual state should possess an independent and uncontrollable authority to raise their own revenues for the supply of their own wants. And making this concession, I affirm that with the sole exception of duties on imports and exports, they would, under the plan of the convention, retain that authority in the most absolute and unqualified sense, and that an attempt on the part of the national government to abridge them to the exercise of it will be a violent assumption of power unwarranted by any article or clause of its constitution. An entire consolidation of the states into the one complete national sovereignty would imply an entire subordination of the parts, and whatever powers might remain in them would be altogether dependent on the general will. But as the plan of the convention aimed only at a partial union or consolidation, the state governments would clearly retain all the rights of sovereignty, which they before had, and which were not by that act exclusively delegated to the United States. This exclusive delegation, or rather this alienation of state sovereignty, would only exist in three cases: where the Constitution in express terms granted an exclusive authority to the Union, to the Union, where it granted in one instance an authority to the Union, and in another prohibited the states from exercising the like authority, and where it granted an authority to the Union to which a similar authority to in the states will be absolutely and totally contradictory and repugnant. I use these terms to distinguish this last case from another which might appear to resemble it, but which would, in fact, be essentially different. I mean, where the exercise of a concurrent jurisdiction might be productive of occasional interferences in the policy of any branch of administration, but would not imply any direct contradiction or repugnancy in point of constitutional authority. These three cases of exclusive jurisdiction in the federal government may be exemplified by the following instances. The last clause, but one in the eighth section of the first article, provides expressly that Congress shall exercise exclusive legislation over the district to be appropriated as the seat of government. This answers the first question. The first clause of the same section empowers Congress to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. And the second clause of the 10th section of the same article declares that no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imports or exports, except for the purpose of executing its inspection laws. Hence, would result in exclusive power in the Union to lay duties on imports and exports, with the particular exception mentioned. But this power is abridged by another clause, which declares that no tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state, in the consequence of which qualification it now only extends to the duties on imports. This answers to the second case. The third will be found in that clause which declares that Congress shall have power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization throughout the United States. This must necessarily be exclusive, because if each state had power to prescribe a distinct rule, there could be no uniform rule. A case which may perhaps be thought to resemble the latter, by which it is in fact widely different, affects the question immediately under consideration. I mean the power of imposing taxes on all articles other than exports and imports. This, I contend, is manifestly a concurrent and co-equal authority in the United States and in the individual states. There is plainly no expression in the granting clause which makes that power exclusive in the Union. There is no independent clause or sentence which prohibits the states from exercising it. So far is this from being the case that a plain and conclusive argument to the contrary is to be deducible from the restraint laid upon the states in relation to duties on imports and exports. This restriction implies an admission that if it were not inserted, the states would possess the power it excludes, and it implies a further admission that as to all other taxes, the authority of the states remains undiminished. In any other view, it would be both unnecessary and dangerous. It would be unnecessary because if the grant to the Union of the power of laying such duties implied the exclusion of the states or even their subordination, in this particular, there could be no need of such a restriction. It would be dangerous because the introduction of it leads directly to the conclusion which has been mentioned, and which, if the reasoning of the objectors be just, could not have been intended. I mean that the states, in all cases to which the restriction did not apply, would have concurrent power of taxation with the union. The restriction in question amounts to what lawyers call a negative predicate. That is a negation of one thing and an affirmance of another, or an affirmation. A negation of the authority of the states to impose taxes on imports and exports, and an affirmance of their authority to impose them on all other articles. It would be mere sophistry to argue that it was meant to exclude them absolutely from the imposition of taxes of the former kind, and to leave them at liberty to lay others subject to the control of the national legislature. The restraining or prohibitory clause only says that they shall not, without the consent of Congress, lay such duties. And if we were to understand this in the sense of last mentioned, the Constitution would then be made to introduce a formal provision for the sake of the very absurd conclusion. Which is that the states, with the consent of the national legislature, might tax imports and exports, and then they might tax every other article, unless controlled by the same body. If this was the intention, why was it not left in the first instance to what is alleged to be the natural operation of the original clause, conferring a general power of taxation upon the union? It is evident that this could not have been the intention, and that it will not bear a construction of the kind. It adds to a supposition of repugnancy between the power of taxation in the states and in the union. It cannot be supported in that sense that which would be requisite to work in exclusion of the states. It is indeed possible that a tax might be laid on a particular article by a state, which might render it inexpedient that a further tax should be laid on the same article by the union. But it would not imply constitutional inability to impose a further tax. The quantity of the imposition, the expediency or inexpediency of an increase on either side would be mutually questions of prudence, but there would be involved no direct contradiction of power. The particular policy of the national and of the state systems of finance might now and then not exactly coincide, and might require reciprocal forbearances. It is not, however, a mere possibility of inconvenience in the exercise of powers, but an immediate constitutional repugnancy that can by implication alienate and extinguish a pre-existing right of sovereignty. The necessity of a concurrent jurisdiction in certain cases results from the division of the sovereign power and the rule of all authorities, of which the states are not explicitly divested in favor of the union. Remain with them in full vigor is not only a theoretical consequence of that division, but is clearly admitted by the whole tenor of the instrument, which contains the articles of the proposed constitution. We there find that, notwithstanding the affirmative grants of general authorities, there has been the most pointed care in those cases where it was deemed improper that the like authorities should reside in states, to insert negative clauses prohibiting the exercise of them by the states. The 10th section of the first article consists altogether of such provisions. The circumstance is a clear indication of the sense of the convention, and furnishes a rule of interpretation out of the body of the act, which justifies the position I have advanced and refutes every hypothesis to the contrary. All right. So we got 31 and 32 tonight. So I hope you enjoy the reading. I will be back with more readings very soon. So thank you for listening. I'll get back to Star Trek Fleet Command. If not later tonight, because I do have somewhat of an early shift tomorrow. If not later tonight, then after work tomorrow for sure. So I'll see you guys later.